One thing that always stood out to me in Pearl Harbor is how low the Japanese planes are flying. They're constantly passing right next to ships, squeezing between structures, and making these incredibly close flybys. It definitely looks awesome on screen. The problem is, why would they do that? Their mission wasn't to put on an air show. They were there to hit their targets as quickly as possible and get out. Flying that close to battleships and harbor structures would just add unnecessary risk. One mistake, one gust of wind, one wrong move, and you're in the water. It makes for great cinema, but it feels more like a Hollywood stunt sequence than a real military attack. This scene always felt a little strange to me. By this point, bombs are already falling, ships are exploding, anti-aircraft guns are firing, and somehow some people are still asleep. I get what the movie is trying to do. It's showing how unexpected the attack was. But after those first explosions, Pearl Harbor wasn't exactly a quiet place anymore. The shock and confusion make sense. Sleeping through all of it, that's a lot harder to believe. Another thing I noticed is just how low some of these planes are flying. And I don't mean low for an attack run. I mean really low. In some shots, they look like they're only a few meters above the ground. It looks great in a movie because it makes everything feel faster and more dangerous. But if your goal is to hit military targets, flying that low around buildings, masts, smoke, and anti-aircraft fire seems like a good way to get yourself killed. These pilots were trained to carry out an attack, not perform stunt flying. This is where the movie starts feeling less like a historical drama and more like an action film. The American pilots make a last-second maneuver, and the 4 Japanese fighters chasing them fly straight into each other. Could something like this happen? Maybe. But in the middle of a real air battle with trained military pilots, it feels a little too convenient. It's the kind of moment that works perfectly for the audience. But maybe a little too perfectly. After the mid-air collision, the movie immediately gives us another unlikely hero moment. Sailors climb a tower, start shooting, and manage to bring down a passing Japanese aircraft. The scene itself isn't impossible. What's unusual is how perfectly everything lines up. Another thing I noticed is how often the American pilots survive situations that look almost impossible. Several times throughout the battle, Japanese fighters get directly behind them in what looks like the perfect firing position. But somehow the shots miss, the heroes escape, and the chase continues. Of course, missing shots happened in real combat. But when it keeps happening over and over again, it starts to feel less like combat and more like plot armor. There's another odd detail in this scene. We're supposed to be watching a fighter aircraft strafing the building, but the impacts almost look like small arms fire. The attack feels surprisingly light, considering these aircraft were armed with weapons far more powerful than an ordinary machine gun. To be fair, not everything in the movie is exaggerated. One of the most memorable parts of the film is when 2 American pilots manage to get airborne during the attack and fight back against the Japanese aircraft. As dramatic as it looks on screen, that part is actually based on a real story. During the attack, American pilots George Welch and Kenneth managed to reach their fighters and take off, while Pearl Harbor was still under attack. Against overwhelming odds, they engaged Japanese aircraft and are credited with shooting down several enemy planes. The movie definitely adds some Hollywood flair to their story. But, unlike many of the scenes we've talked about, this wasn't pure fiction. In just a few hours, the United States lost more than 2,400 servicemen and civilians. More than 1,000 others were wounded. 8 battleships were damaged, and several were sunk or heavily crippled during the attack. The USS Arizona alone lost over 1,100 crewmen when a bomb detonated her forward ammunition magazine. And while Hollywood gives us dramatic dogfights, lucky escapes, and perfectly timed hero moments, the real attack was mostly confusion, smoke, fire, and destruction. That's why Pearl Harbor remains such an interesting movie to talk about. Some scenes are surprisingly close to reality. Others clearly put entertainment ahead of historical accuracy. But in the end, the real events of December 7, 1941 were far more tragic than anything Hollywood could put on screen. By the time the attack ended, nearly 20 American naval vessels had been damaged or sunk. More than 180 aircraft had been destroyed, and the United States had been pulled directly into World War II.